Welcome to a 3-player game of Commander featuring Kyle playing his Karona False God deck, Chris playing his Jhoira Ghitu deck, and me playing my Omnath Locus of Mana deck. Kyle wins the die roll and keeps an opening hand of 2 Swamps, God of the Shrine, Mountain, Demonic Tutor, Maelstrom Archangel, and Wrath of God. Chris goes next and keeps an opening hand of Snow-Covered Mountain, Sulphur Falls, Niv-Mizzet the Firemind, Arcanus the Omnipotent, Sol Ring, and Preordain. I went next keeping an opening hand of Avenger of Zendikar, Ranger's Path, Verdant Catacombs, and 4 Forests. Kyle starts by drawing Boros Charm and playing a God of the Shrine. He passes. Chris draws a Spell Crumple and sets down a Bloodstained Mire, sacking it for Volcanic Island, which he then taps to cast a Preordain. He draws the Darksteel Colossus off the Preordain. He passes the turn. I draw a Mana Reflection, play a Forest, and pass the turn. Kyle draws a City of Brass and sets down a Mountain, tapping it to cast a Demonic Tutor, searching for a Chromatic Lantern and putting it into his hand. Chris untaps and draws Niv-Mizzet, the other Dragon Meat. He sets down a Sulphur Falls, tapping it for a Sol Ring. He passes. I draw a Harmonize, set down a Forest, and pass the turn. Kyle draws Beast Within, then taps out to cast the Chromatic Lantern he tutored for the turn prior. He passes. Chris draws Command Tower and plays it as his land for the turn. He then taps all of his lands to cast a Jhoira, leaving his Sol Ring up. He passes the turn. I draw a Chord of Calling and play a Forest for the turn. I then cast Omnath from my command zone. I pass the turn. Kyle untaps and draws a Bayou, which he plays. Thanks to the Chromatic Lantern, he taps all 5 Wubberg and casts a Maelstrom Archangel. He then passes. At the end of Kyle's turn, Chris suspends Arcanus the Omnipotent thanks to Jhoira's ability. He then untaps and removes a time counter from Arcanus. He draws Rimescale Dragon and plays a Mountain as his land for the turn. Not wanting to suspend anything else in his hand, Chris decides to hardcast one of his Niv-Mizzets of the Draco Genius Persuasion. I untap and draw another Forest, which I play. I have no pre-combat plays, then, fearing Kyle's Archangel, I decide to attack him. But before the damage step, I feed 4 green mana to Omnath to General Punch Kyle for 5. Post-combat, I use the 4 mana to play Ranger's Path, searching up 2 more Forests and putting them onto the battlefield. I pass the turn. Kyle untaps, draws and plays Breeding Pool, then passes. Chris untaps, draws Snow-Covered Island, plays it, and taps 6 mana for another Niv-Mizzet, completing the tag team. Declining to attack, Chris passes the turn. I untap, draw a Windswept Heath, and play a Forest. Fearing bounce or some kind of otherwise removal, I decide to cast Mana Reflection in lieu of attacking, and then pass my turn. But at the end of my turn, Kyle decides Omnath having Mana Reflection is a bad idea. He Beast Withins my Mana Reflection. In response to the Beast Within, I feed Omnath 2 green manas. Kyle untaps and draws a Herald of Leshrac. He then goes to combat, bashing move for 5 with his Archangel. Then, using his Angel's ability, casts Wrath of God for free. Kyle then taps out to cast the Herald of Leshrac that he just drew. He passes the turn. Chris untaps, removes a time counter from a suspended card, draws Steam Vents, then recasts his commander for a second time. He then plays the Steam Vents tapped, leaving the Sol Ring open yet again. He passes. I untap, draw a Sylvan Library, then tap 7 manas to cast Avenger of Zendikar, producing 7/0/1 plant tokens. I then play Verdant Catacombs, triggering Avenger's ability, giving all of my plants +1. I then pass. Kyle untaps and then steals one of my forests with Herald. He then draws Phyrexian Metamorph and passes the turn. At the end of his turn, Chris suspends Darksteel Colossus. Chris untaps, casts Arcanus the Omnipotent, and draws Fury Charm. He then plays Reliquary Tower, which is convenient because he has a large hand size the rest of the game. He immediately draws using Arcanus' ability, Hinder, Snow-Covered Island, and Jhoira's Time Bug. He passes the turn. I untap and draw Woodfall Primus. I play a Windswept Heath, triggering the Avenger's ability to make my plants 2 3s. I then go to combat, attacking Kyle with my Avenger and Chris with all of my plants. Chris blocks one of my plants, before damage, suspends his Rimescale Dragon with Jhoira. Kyle has no response, but before damage, I sack both of my lands to search up forests in order to bolster my plants to 4/5s. Chris takes 24 damage, while Kyle takes 5. Post-combat, I cast a Harmonize, which gets countered by Chris's Spell Crumple. I then try to get a Sylvan Library onto my field, but it is then hindered by Chris, also getting sent to the bottom. I pass the turn. Kyle untaps and steals one of my forests, and Chris's Volcanic Island. Kyle draws a Sylvan Library and then plays a Phyrexian Metamorph, copying my Avenger Zendikar, which gives him 9 plant tokens. He then plays a City of Brass, pumping up his plants. Kyle then casts his Sylvan Library, which does not get countered by anyone. Kyle passes the turn. Chris untaps and draws a Blightsteel Colossus. He then plays a Snow-Covered Island for his land for the turn, and taps Arcanus for 3 more cards. He draws Karn, Izzet Charm, and Time Stretch. He then casts the Karn Liberated and exiles the Avenger copy. He then Fury Charms, removing 2 time counters from Darksteel Colossus, and uses it to attack Kyle. Kyle decides not to block and takes 11 damage from the Colossus. He then passes the turn. I untap and draw a Life from the Loam, which I immediately cast, targeting my 2 lands in my graveyard. I then play Verdant Catacombs as my land for the turn, triggering my Avenger. I then go to combat, attacking Kyle with my Avenger and 4 of my plants. He blocks 1 each with his plants, taking no damage. After combat, I sack my Verdant, fetching up a forest. I then tap 6 mana and 3 plants to cast a Chord of Calling for 6. I search my library for a duplicate, imprinting Kyle's Herald of Leshrac, making my duplicate a 5/6 avatar, and returning both mine and Chris's stolen lands. I then pass the turn. Kyle untaps, looks at the top 3 cards of his library with Sylvan Library, and decides to draw a World Queller, which he plays. He then passes. Chris untaps all of his permanents and draws Arid Mesa. He then exiles a card from my hand using card's ability. He then casts Time Stretch, targeting himself. Neither Kyle nor myself have an answer. Chris then draws 3 cards using Arcanus, Mizzium Mortars, Rhystic Study, and Shivan Meteor. Chris attacks me for 11 with the Darksteel Colossus, then plays Arid Mesa, sacking it to find an island for some reason. Chris then passes the turn to himself. He untaps, removes a time counter from his dragon, draws Ulamog, the Infinite Gyre, exiles my Avenger with Karn, draws Snow-Covered Mountain, Lightning Greaves, and another Snow-Covered Mountain, then taps 11 to cast Ulamog to shoot Kyle's World Queller. Chris attacks me with Darksteel Colossus, dealing me 11, then passes the turn back to himself. Chris takes another turn, draws 4 cards using Arcanus' ability. Chris plays Snow Island, then casts a Sensei's Dividing Tab. He then attacks me with his Ulamog, Darksteel Colossus, and Rhymescale Dragon. In response to Ulamog's Annihilatory ability, I sack 4 forests, wanting to keep my plants alive to try to take someone out next turn. But even with blocking, I cannot stave off enough damage to survive the attack. Post-combat, Chris overloads Mizzium Mortar to kill Kyle's plants. Chris exiles Kyle's Sylvan Library with Karn, and plays Jhoira's Time Bug. He passes the turn. Kyle draws and plays a Reliquary Tower, then casts his Commander. It resolves. He then goes to combat, naming Avatar with Karona's ability, and attacks Chris. But before damage, Kyle casts Boros Charm, targeting Karona for double strike. What might have killed Chris was stopped by a well-timed Izzet Charm, countering the Boros Charm. Unable to survive Chris's next turn, Kyle concedes, winning Chris the game.